Most people believe intelligence is something you're born with. You either have it or you don't. Some kids are just sharp. Some adults are just slow. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's one of the most dangerous ideas in the world. Not because it's completely wrong, but because it stops people from doing the one thing that actually matters. Training. Here's what nobody tells you. The greatest minds in history were not born great. They were built. Slowly, deliberately, through habits that most people would never even notice. Albert Einstein failed his first university entrance exam. His teachers described him as slow. Not stupid, just not impressive. But Einstein did something strange. Instead of memorizing formulas like everyone else, he ran experiments inside his head. He called them thought experiments. One of the most famous ones started with a simple question. What would it look like to ride alongside a beam of light? He didn't have a lab. He didn't have funding. He had a question and the patience to sit with it. That single mental exercise eventually became the foundation of the theory of relativity. Not because Einstein was born with a bigger brain, but because he trained his brain to do something most people never practice. He made it think in pictures instead of words. He made it simulate instead of memorize. Leonardo da Vinci had no formal education. He was born out of wedlock, which in the 1400s meant no university, no guild training, no path to any traditional career. But da Vinci filled more than 7,000 pages of notebooks, not with answers, with questions. Why does water form spirals? How does a bird change direction in the air? What happens to a face when it smiles versus when it fakes a smile? He watched everything, drew everything, and forced himself to explain what he saw before he ever looked for someone else's explanation. That is not talent, that is training. Systematic, obsessive, daily training of a mind that nobody expected to become one of the most powerful in human history. 2 different centuries, 2 different people, same pattern. They didn't wait for intelligence to show up. They built it on purpose. John Boyd was a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. He wasn't the most talented pilot in his class. He wasn't the fastest or the most experienced. But Boyd had a reputation that no one could explain. He never lost a dogfight, not once. And it wasn't because his reflexes were superhuman. It was because he trained his brain to cycle through decisions faster than anyone in the sky. He developed a framework he called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act, then start again. Most pilots in combat would get stuck between observing and deciding. Fear would slow them down. Confusion would freeze them. Boyd trained himself to compress that loop until there was almost no gap between seeing the problem and acting on it. His opponents weren't slower because they were dumber. They were slower because nobody had taught them to train the speed of their own thinking. Boyd did. And that one difference made him untouchable. David Epstein spent years studying peak performers. Athletes, musicians, scientists, executives. He wanted to know what separated the best from the rest. And what he found surprised almost everyone. The highest performers were not the ones who specialized early. They were the ones who tried many different things first. Musicians who played 3 instruments before choosing one became better than those who picked one instrument at age 5 and never stopped. Scientists who worked across multiple fields produced more breakthroughs than those who stayed in one lane their entire career. Epstein called it range. The idea that your brain gets sharper not by going deeper into one thing too early, but by going wider first. Because when you learn across domains, your brain starts doing something powerful. It transfers patterns from one field to another. You see a supply chain problem and recognize it as a circulation problem you once read about in biology. You hear a negotiation tactic and realize it mirrors a chess opening you studied years ago. That kind of thinking doesn't come from a high IQ score. It comes from training your mind to connect instead of collect. Now, step back. Einstein trained his mind with thought experiments. Da Vinci trained his with observation and questions. Boyd trained his with decision speed. Epstein proved that range trains the mind to transfer knowledge across boundaries. You've probably already guessed it. IQ is not a fixed number. It's a system. A set of mental habits that either grow or decay depending on how you use them. And the people we call geniuses are not the ones who were born with more. They are the ones who trained harder in ways that nobody was measuring. Daniel Kahneman spent his career studying how the human brain actually makes decisions. And what he found should bother you, because most of the time you're not really thinking. Kahneman described two systems inside your brain. System 1 is fast. It's automatic. It's the part of you that reacts before you even realize you've reacted. Someone cuts you off in traffic, you feel rage. You see a headline, you form an opinion. You meet someone new, you decide in seconds whether you trust them. That's System 1. It's quick, it's efficient, and it's wrong more often than you think. System 2 is the opposite. It's slow, it's deliberate, it takes effort. It's the part of your brain that checks the math, questions the assumption, considers what you might be missing. Here's the problem. System 2 doesn't activate on its own. It has to be triggered, and most people go through their entire day, their entire week, sometimes their entire life, without ever triggering it on purpose. They react, they assume, they go with their gut. And they call it thinking, but it's not thinking, it's autopilot. And in an era where every decision matters more than it used to, autopilot is expensive. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable. AI already handles System 1 better than you do. Pattern recognition, fast processing, surface-level decisions based on massive data. That's not your edge anymore. The only edge you still have is System 2. The ability to pause, to question what looks obvious, to hold two conflicting ideas in your head and not rush to pick one, to think about your thinking. But that ability doesn't just show up because you're human. It has to be trained. And if you're not training it, something else is training you. Your feed is training you to react. Your notifications are training you to switch. Your environment is training you to stay on autopilot. Every day you don't deliberately practice slow, deep, intentional thinking, System 1 gets stronger and System 2 gets weaker. That's not a theory. That's Kahneman's research played out in real time across an entire generation. The question is not whether you're smart enough. The question is whether you're training the right system. So, what does it actually look like to train your mind on purpose? Not in theory, in practice. Einstein used to sit with a single question for weeks. No rushing, no looking for the answer in someone else's work, just sitting with the question and letting his mind build pictures around it. You don't need to be a physicist to do this. Before your next big decision, try something simple. Imagine 3 different outcomes. Not just the one you want. 3. Then trace each one forward. What happens next? What breaks? What holds up? That exercise forces your brain out of reaction mode and into simulation mode. And simulation is where real thinking lives. Most people never do this because it feels slow. It feels unproductive. But that slowness is the training. Einstein didn't discover relativity by thinking faster. He discovered it by thinking longer. Da Vinci had a different method. He wrote down things he observed but couldn't explain. Not things he already understood, things that confused him. Why does a candle flame flicker in one direction but not another? Why does a heavy stone sink slowly in thick mud but fast in water? He didn't Google the answers. He sat with the confusion and tried to work it out himself first. There's a simple version of this you can start today. Once a day, notice something you see but don't understand. Write it down. 1 sentence. Don't look it up immediately. Spend 5 minutes trying to reason through it on your own. That gap between seeing and understanding is where your brain builds new connections. Skip it and you get information. Stay in it and you get intelligence. Boyd trained differently. He compressed. In the cockpit, he drilled his decision cycle until there was almost no delay between observation and action. You can train the same thing outside of combat. Give yourself small decisions with a hard time limit. What to eat for lunch, decide in 10 seconds. Which email to respond to, first decide in 5. Whether to say yes or no to a meeting, 30 seconds. Not because these decisions matter, but because speed on small decisions trains your brain to process faster when the big ones arrive. Boyd didn't become untouchable by waiting for a real dogfight to practice. He drilled the loop thousands of times before it ever mattered. Epstein's research points to something most people resist. Spend time in areas that have nothing to do with your job. Read a book about evolutionary biology if you work in marketing. Study architecture if you're a software engineer. Learn how jazz musicians improvise if you run a business. Not because those topics are useful on their own, but because your brain starts to transfer patterns. And pattern transfer is what separates someone who knows a lot from someone who sees what others can't. Epstein called it far transfer. It only happens when your brain has raw material from more than one world. And then there's the simplest training of all, the one Kahneman would probably start with. Before you agree to anything important, wait. Not a minute, not an hour, a full day. That pause is not laziness. It's friction. And friction is the only thing that forces System 2 to wake up. Without it, you'll keep reacting. With it, you start actually deciding. There are two kinds of people listening to this right now. The first kind heard everything we just talked about and thought, that's interesting. Maybe they'll remember a few names. Maybe they'll try one of the techniques for a day or two. And then life will get busy and nothing will change. Because deep down, they still believe the story. The story that says, intelligence is a thing you have. A score. A ceiling. A fixed number assigned to you somewhere between birth and high school. The second kind heard something different. They heard that Einstein wasn't born thinking in pictures. He trained it. They heard that Da Vinci wasn't gifted with supernatural observation. He practiced it every single day for decades. They heard that Boyd wasn't born with fast reflexes. He built a system and drilled it until the speed became invisible. And something shifted. Not motivation, not inspiration. Something quieter than that. A realization that the brain they have right now is not the brain they're stuck with. That intelligence is not a photograph. It's a muscle. And muscles don't care about your genetics if you never walk into the gym. Kahneman proved that your default thinking is lazy and full of shortcuts. But he also proved that you can override it. Epstein proved that specialists hit a ceiling, but he also proved that range builds a kind of intelligence that no test can measure and no AI can replicate. Every thought experiment you run is a rep. Every observation you write down is a rep. Every decision you compress is a rep. Every time you pause before reacting, that's a rep. And reps compound. Not in a week. Not in a month, but over years, they build a mind that works differently from everyone around you. The world is full of people waiting to be told they're smart enough, waiting for a test result, waiting for permission, waiting for proof that they're allowed to think at a higher level. But the proof doesn't come before the training. It comes after. IQ is not what you're born with. It's what you train when no one is testing you.